What's going on, fantasy football fans? I'm your host, Hussein the Brain, and you're watching The Couch. I'd like to welcome you all to a special video. It's our first fantasy football DFS video ever, and if you only play season-long leagues, the traditional type, you want to watch this video. I'm going to have a lot of tips and strategies that can be used for traditional season-long leagues as well. If you're new to daily leagues and weekly leagues, this video is for you. If you've been playing DFS for a while, there's still going to be a lot of information that you probably didn't know already that's going to help you win. In this video, I'm going to start off by explaining what DFS is. Then we'll go over the differences between traditional season-long leagues and DFS. Then I'm going to let you guys see the process of how I pick my DFS lineups, what I do from the very beginning. Then we'll talk about the different strategies used for a cash game versus a tournament. And make sure to watch the entire video because at the end I'll reveal some more tips that's going to help you maximize your winnings. Let's start off by talking about what DFS is. What is daily fantasy sports? This new wave of playing fantasy is very exciting because you're not just locked into the same lineup the whole season. You can have a new lineup every day. And when you win, you can have real cash deposited in your account, boom, right away, right after the games are over. The goal is basically the same as traditional fantasy football leagues, and that is to create a roster that's going to score you the most fantasy points. In daily leagues, you have to make sure you fulfill the position requirements. That's 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 defense, and 1 kicker. You also have to stay under the salary cap, and that's the biggest difference between traditional and daily leagues. You have $60,000 to spend, and each player has a price attached to their name. So if you select them, that's deducted from your salary, and you have to stay under that salary cap or you won't have a lineup. You can start off by playing for free, and if you want to play for cash, there's leagues out there where the buy-in is as low as $1. Let's talk about some of the differences in season-long traditional leagues versus DFS. I'm going to be focusing on drafting strategy here. In season-long leagues, you draft NFL players based off potential. They may blow up the last half of the season. In DFS, you don't do that. You focus just on what's going on for this game. Are they going to have a successful game this week or not? Injury risk is a huge factor in season-long leagues, but not so much in DFS. Now, I'm not talking about a player that's already injured. If they're going into a game injured, then that's different. Then you probably don't want to draft that player in DFS. But if a player is injury prone and is 100% healthy and slated to have a good game, you don't really worry about that in DFS. Now, in season-long leagues, players that have a huge history of injury like McFadden or Arian Foster, you may want to avoid or draft them later. In DFS, that doesn't really apply. It's not a big factor. In season-long leagues, a lot of experts recommend that you mix between low-risk players and high-risk players. You may have 1 or 2 boom or bust players, but you need some safe players, maybe some elite workhorse running backs that's going to help balance your team. In DFS, the strategy is a little different. You will likely have a mix as well, but you usually want to lean towards a low-risk roster or a high-risk roster. And I'll explain that in a little bit why that is. Right now, I want to focus on the beginning steps. What I do once the rosters are open, it's ready for another week of DFS lineups. These are the first things I do. The very first thing I do is I look at the Vegas lines and analyze the game scripts. For the games that have the highest scoring points, I may like those quarterbacks more in those games. The winning team, because they're going to have the lead likely in that game, they're going to give the ball to the running back, whether it's carries or pass attempts, catches. So I may like the running back of that winning team in those games. Now, I may look at some of those low-scoring games that week, and that could result in a great defense, a sleeper defense that's not priced too high. So I might factor that into my roster selection. The next thing I look at is to exploit some of these prices. Sometimes the prices take a little while to catch up. There may be some breaking news, like let's say the wide receiver 1 on a team and the wide receiver 2 is injured. That wide receiver 4 on that team is going to be priced at minimum salary usually, especially if it happens closer to Sunday. So I look at all those exploits. I note those players that are extremely cheap. Players that you know are going to probably produce that are extremely cheap make for great picks. Then I note the players that I'm going to avoid. In 2014, we saw Calvin Johnson and Jimmy Graham be used as decoys because they had lingering injuries. Now, if I think a player may be used as a decoy, or if they have a significant injury that may allow them to have a terrible game and they have a high price tag, I'm definitely going to avoid those players. So I note them, hey, I'm definitely avoiding these players. Don't even think about putting them in my roster. Now, one of the factors I look at is weather. Not a huge factor, and some of it is myth. I go to NFLweather.com. I look at what some of the situations are. Now, rain and snow and a lot of other things that people think affect the game don't affect the game as much. And there's, of course, exceptions. We saw that snowstorm in 2013. Remember, Megatron had the huge chunk of snow on his helmet. I'm sure a lot of you remember that game. Now, if there's some kind of weird snowstorm like that, yeah, you probably don't want to start players in that game, especially a QB or a receiver. But a lot of times weather doesn't matter. Remember Tom Brady, it was snowing. He threw, was it 4 or 5 touchdowns in one half? It was insane against the Tennessee Titans a few years back. Now, when weather does matter a lot, this is the most impact weather does have, is when there's high winds. Teams throw less pass attempts and less yards per pass attempt when there's a lot of wind. Now, winds above 10 miles an hour, you start to see a good decrease in pass attempts and how long the ball is thrown per pass. Now, winds above 16 miles an hour is really bad. So if I see winds above 16 or 20 miles per hour, I'm probably going to avoid that quarterback or any of those 2 quarterbacks in that game, period. And remember, all these tips I'm giving you are just little tips to help you have that little competitive edge against your opponent. The main goal is always the same. You want to make a roster that's going to give you the most fantasy points. I'm just giving you these other small strategies for you to use to help you create that roster. You might have a good roster, and then with all these strategies I give you, you may make 1 or 2 changes that'll help you give you that edge, especially throughout the season. This all adds up. You might have a bad week for 1 week, but then 5-6 weeks later, because of these strategies you implemented, you'll have that edge and you'll win. Let's talk about cash versus tournaments. Now, what a cash game is either a 50-50 league. That's, let's say, a league of 100 participants, and 50 of them win and 50 of them lose. Or it could be a head-to-head matchup. 1 guy versus 1 guy. So you basically have 50-50 chance to win. Those are cash games. Tournament games are also called GPP. That's guaranteed prize pool. Now, in these type of tournaments, typically around the top 10% of the participants or top 20% of the participants win a large chunk of cash, and the buy-in for these leagues are typically pretty low. So your chances are less likely to win in tournaments, GPPs, but the prize is pretty rewarding. When you participate in cash games, what you want to do is pick a low-risk team. You don't want to pick a lot of boom or bust players. Now, the 2 positions that are the most consistent and what you want to usually allocate your money towards is quarterbacks and running backs. Now, not telling you to do this every single week, every situation. It's just one factor to know, that a lot of people that win cash games, they do allocate their money more for quarterbacks and running backs. Tournaments, GPPs, they're the complete opposite. You want to allocate more of your money on wide receivers. Wide receivers are boom or bust, just naturally with that position. 1 week they'll get you 0 touchdowns, and the next week 3 touchdowns. Another strategy for GPPs is to stack a quarterback with their wide receiver. Now, if that wide receiver scores 3 touchdowns that game, that quarterback is going to have a good game. So that's a really good strategy. And if that team does terrible, then you're out of it. But stacking is better for tournament games. You can do it in cash games. Just know that there's a lot more risk with that. So for cash games, what you want to do is maximize your floor. You're basically building a lineup not to lose. For tournament games, what you want to do is maximize your ceiling. You want to go for the gusto here. Go for the most riskiest picks. Stack players, go all out, try to score the most points. Because a good team won't win a tournament. Only a great team will win a tournament. And here are some more tips that'll help you gain that edge in DFS. Okay, for quarterbacks, we already discussed a lot of this, but you want to look at the matchup. And when you look at the matchup, obviously you look at their pass defense, how they do against quarterbacks. Okay, everybody knows that. You also want to look at the game script and see if the other team is a high-scoring team. Will they score a lot of points? Now, you combine those two, your quarterback that you're about to pick is going up against a team who scores a lot of points and a team that has a terrible pass defense. That makes for a pretty sweet matchup. And another basic tip, that this one you may already know, is you want to look at a team. If you're picking a quarterback on that team, do they pass a lot? Do they tend to pass more than they run? Also, how efficient are they? Some teams pass a lot but aren't efficient. So you want to look at both those two things. Typically, if that quarterback's on a very efficient pass offense and they throw the ball a lot, that price tag is going to reflect and be very high anyway, regardless. But you do want to look at that though. Now let's get into the juicy stats you want to analyze. For running backs, everyone knows, oh, I'm going to look at rushing yards, and they look at total yards from line of scrimmage, receiving and rushing. They look at touchdowns, receptions, all that. Now, the one stat that correlates the most to fantasy points, it doesn't directly give you fantasy points, yards, receptions, catches, is snap count. This is very important. Not a lot of people know this. So the more snaps, the more times a running back lines up, total snap count, the more fantasy points they get. You also want to look at the percentage, the amount of times that running back lines up for that team. So if the team runs 100 plays and the running back is lined up 100 times, their snap count percentage is 100%. This is one huge factor I use when picking running backs in DFS. Another stat I look at really closely is goal line carries and goal line snaps as well. Who's the goal line back? Now this is going to be really important when you're picking a sleeper running back. Let's say you pick a stud running back for your RB1. Your RB2, you may want to go with someone that's not well known. And there's a ton of injuries especially in the running back position. So I look at those things. Who's the team like to put in those situations, even if they're not running the ball? And who do they give it to as a carry in those situations, those important situations? Obviously, this stat is going to mean, hey, this is the running back that could get that touchdown. There's not a whole lot of instances where running backs score 50, 60, 70-yard touchdowns. Those are so rare. Most touchdowns scored by running backs are on the goal line, within 10 yards of the touchdown. We talked about game script before. Now, how about if you're thinking about picking a running back for a team that's going to get blown out? Those teams need to pass to get back in the game, so they're going to pass a lot in the fourth quarter. But you really like that running back, let's say. Now, if they're not a pass-catching running back, they don't have the ability to catch the ball, they're going to likely not even line up. But if they have pass-catching ability, then that running back is pretty much immune to any game script. And of course, just because Vegas says the game script is going to go one way, it doesn't mean that it's going to. It just indicates that it's likely to go that way. That pass-catching running back is very important. That lowers your risk right there. If a running back can run well and catch the ball well, and they're lined up a lot, they're going to be lined up in no matter what's the situation, whether that team's getting blown out or they're the team that has a huge lead. Let's talk about wide receivers and tight ends. Just like snap count is to running backs, amount of targets and the percentage of targets on that team directed towards that receiver is the most important stat to look at that doesn't directly give you fantasy points. So of course, everyone looks at receptions, yards, touchdowns, and touchdowns are very hard to predict. They're pretty much unpredictable. The only thing we can really predict is with touchdowns is how bad that defense they're facing. Do they give a lot of receiving touchdowns up? And the height of the receiver you're picking. It's shown that taller receivers and taller tight ends, they're more likely to score that touchdown. Now, since we're talking about targets, this is one of those stats to look at that's going to really help you in season-long leagues as well. Now, you look at all these experts, they always talk about targets. Now, they may not explain to you why they're talking about targets. It's because it's a very important stat and it really indicates who's going to score the most fantasy points. If a player is getting a lot of targets, that means that, hey, they may score a lot of fantasy points for you. Another stat you want to look at for wide receivers and tight ends is targets within the 10-yard line. When the team's close to the end zone, who do they like to throw to? For defenses, we already covered the game script. A low-scoring game makes for finding a good sleeper defense. But the other stat I look at that's very important is pressure on the quarterback. Now, defenses are very inconsistent in fantasy, but a defense may not do so well one game, but if they constantly pressure the quarterback, they get a lot of pressures on the quarterback, that defense is bound to have a big game. So that's a really good stat to look at when selecting your defense. That's why we see in fantasy defenses with those crazy killer D lines that wreak havoc. Those defenses tend to do very well in fantasy. And kickers, as you can probably know what I'm going to say, they're the most inconsistent position in fantasy for season long and DFS. So don't spend too much money on a kicker. Typically, I spend what's left over on a kicker. Talking about salary cap, you also want to spend a good chunk of your money. Probably, you can't really put an exact number, but if I had to, I'd say try to use at least 99% of your salary cap. Now, don't go pick a player just because, I want to spend more of my money. What I'm talking about is you got $60,000 to spend. You don't have to spend the entire $60,000, and don't feel forced that you have to spend another $100 or $2 so you pick another player. But at the same time, you don't want to, if you have a $60,000 salary, you don't want to spend $50,000 and be, hey, my team's good. That's gonna not work out for you. Tournaments or GPPs are pretty exciting. They're hard to resist sometimes. And I have a good stat that's gonna help you out in GPPs a lot. So GPP stands for Guaranteed Prize Pool. So the prize is guaranteed. Also, the amount of participants, the maximum participants in that league is also set too. It doesn't fluctuate. And there's going to be some GPPs that are not going to be full. Let's say a tournament is for 1,000 participants max. Now, if it's close to kickoff time and there's only 700 participants, and hey, there's no way it's gonna get full that fast. That's a great league to join because you have a lot higher chance to rank and get paid for that. So that's a great way to exploit GPPs. If you see it's not gonna be full, join it. So look out for GPPs that are gonna be well below the maximum number of allowed participants. Me, I'm a cash game type of guy. I like to play a lot of cash games every week, but these tournaments and events are often too hard to resist. Last year, I came this close to placing in the FanDuel Fantasy Football Championship event. They flew out 100 guys, all expenses paid. I almost made it. I'm over it. Well, not really, but I almost made it to Vegas, and I think the winner won $2 million. These guys have great promotions and events going on. You can click here to check it out or follow the link down below in the description. Right now we have a special promotion with FanDuel and Fantasy Couch where they will match up to $200 for your first time deposit. So please check that link out. Also, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'll be coming out with more DFS videos, my DFS picks every week. So make sure you guys subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.